Charts and dual axes. I believe that's how you pronounce that, axes. We're going to talk about charts with two axes. We'll begin by creating a chart with more than one axis. We're going to create a combination chart, which doesn't require that you have more than one axis, by the way. We're going to look at a few ways to utilize this functionality by plotting a performance against a target. We're going to build a thermometer chart, and we're going to build a comparative histogram. So I've got a few data sets on this worksheet, beginning with some data for 2009 that shows the number of jobs that were created or lost in any given month and the unemployment rate. I've got some made-up numbers that are performance to target and a difference between those two. And I've got another data set that has a performance to target where the target is defined as a band or a range of values. And finally, I've got the leading causes of death worldwide in descending order, totaled up for males and females. So to start with, we're going to build a chart with a dual axis. And we've actually done this before, but in case you missed it in one of the prior movies, it's an important thing to know how to do. It's an easy thing to do. So we're going to do it again. I'm going to select the first data set, press F11, and Excel automatically gives me a chart on its own sheet, a chart sheet. We have what is a standard problem when you have more than one series. Sometimes the series are not numerically compatible. In this case, the unemployment rate is a fairly small number. Wish it was smaller, but it's below 10%. And then the numbers of jobs that were gained or lost range from about a minus 40,000 to a minus over 800,000. So there's a completely different scope of numbers that reflect the unemployment rate as compared to job creation rate. So the way to fix this is to single-click one of the series, right-click one of the columns making up the series, and there's a couple of ways to select this actually. You could do it from the drop-down here, and you could do it from the Layout tab with the drop-down here. The unemployment rate is currently selected because I've already done that, and I can left-click Format Selection, and the Format Data Series dialog box will be displayed, and right in the center, we have an option to create a secondary axis. So I'm going to close that. Now we have a dual axis. The problem now is that both of these charts are column charts, and our unemployment rate column is on top of the job creation column. So it looks like the job creation numbers completely changed. They didn't, of course. Just the unemployment rate column is on top of the blue job creation column. So the next thing that you want to do is change the chart type for the unemployment rate series, or for the job creation series for that matter, but I'm going to change the unemployment rate series. And to do that, to get to that functionality, you can do it in a number of different ways, as usual with Excel. I can go to the Design tab and click Change Chart Type in the Type group, or I can right-click the data series and left-click Change Series Chart Type. I'm going to change it to a line chart by double-clicking Line, and that really sort of completes the process of setting up a dual axis and taking advantage of the fact that we have a dual axis by using different chart types. So I'm going to close this chart by right-clicking the chart sheet and left-clicking Delete. And we're going to create a combination chart. We're going to create a combination chart with this data, the performance band data, because I've got three series. Pressing F11, I get another chart built by Excel automatically on its own sheet, a chart sheet. And the combination chart, we just actually built a combination chart because we used two different chart types to plot the two different series that we had. But you don't have to move one of the series to its own axis, another axis, in order to do that. We can select the actual series, go to Change Chart Type, and make that a line chart by double-clicking Line. We can select the upper range by left-clicking one time, right-clicking that, go to Change Series Chart Type. So for this second series, I'm going to change the series to a bar chart. And I'm not suggesting in this specific circumstance that this is a good idea. The point is that you can lay different chart types one over another. I'm going to select the width now right-click and go to Change Series Chart Type. And that's exactly what it is that we're doing. We're changing the chart type of the selected series. So the chart type obviously applies to the series. It doesn't apply to the entire chart. When you're doing this, some chart types are not compatible with other chart types that we've plotted so far. The bar chart is not compatible with the pie chart. And I get this message, some chart types cannot be combined with other chart types. Select a different chart type. So you can't combine all the different chart types, but I can, I believe, make this a surface chart. Now when I did that, all the other plotted series disappeared. So I'm going to Control Z to bring them back, left click the width series, right click it, and go to change the chart type again. And this time I'm going to select something that doesn't completely reorient the axis that's on the chart already. I'll just pick another type of line chart and double click that. So again, we've distorted this information so it's completely meaningless. But the point is that the combination chart can be built from several different series, and the chart type is associated with the series and not the chart itself. So I'm going to delete this and go back to the data. We're now going to utilize this to plot the performance against a target. So I have some data that's mapped out to performance, and I've got some data that maps out what the target or the goal was for those different periods. We can call them months, weeks, days, doesn't really matter. And then I've got a difference calculation that's just the difference between the two. And having selected the data, I'm going to press F11 and create a chart. And every time I create a chart, by the way, it's the default chart. We've talked about that before, but I just want to reiterate the point, which you have some control over. You can change to a different default chart type. In fact, you can create your own default chart type using a different layout and adding or taking away some of the objects that make up a chart, like setting up another axis, the data table, data labels, etc. Now, for the time being, I'm going to get rid of the difference series by selecting it and pressing delete. So I'm left with a clustered column chart with two series, the performance numbers and the target numbers. To help visually display the difference between these two series a little better, I can select one of the series and convert it to a different chart type, since we know how to do that. So I've got the target and I've got the performance. That's one way to express the performance against a target. And in this case, there's really no reason to set up another axis because both the target and the performance have values that are within a similar range of numbers. But this is probably not the best way to do this. So I'm going to go to the Select Data dialog box, and I'm going to select, this time, just the difference series, and then left-click OK. And we've plotted the variance between the performance and the target. If that's the focus of the analysis, if that's what we want to visually display, is how far off the mark that we are, this may be a far better way to do it than to show the performance numbers and the target numbers as two separate series. We can see in period 1 we missed the target by about 28 units. In period 6 we bettered the target by about 16 units. Period 8 it was 15 units. So this is just another technique to plot the performance against a target. And in the prior movie we had some control over where the horizontal axis crosses the vertical axis, and in this case Excel automatically moved it towards the center of the chart because we had positive values and negative values that we're plotting. And this provides a good example of why you would want to move the horizontal axis and position it differently. So I'm going to delete this chart, and we're going to create another chart that plots performance against a target. And this time the target is defined by a range of numbers. The upper series combined with the value for the width will provide the upper range, which will be 100. And the lower value of the band will be 80. And you're going to see how all this fits together in a minute. And then the actual series is self-explanatory. It's what we actually achieved. So having selected one of those data points, I'm going to F11 again to create another chart on its own chart sheet. So there's several things that we need to do to change the way this chart looks. And these steps don't necessarily have to be done in the order that I'm going to do them in. But one of the things we need to do is change the chart type for the actual series. So I'm going to left click it and then right click the shortcut menu. And I'm going to double click line to create a line chart. The next thing I want to do is change the series for the upper to a different chart type. Right clicking, change series chart type. And I want to change it to a stacked area chart. Double clicking. And then I'm going to select the width series, right click, change that chart type to a stacked area chart. And we're almost done. The next step is to left click and select the series that I've labeled upper, right click the series, and then left click format data series from the shortcut menu. Go to the fill option and select no fill from the radio button, and then close. And we've created a band of acceptable values for which we've plotted the actual achieved results over using a line chart. And you might want to get rid of the legend, and I can do that by selecting it and pressing delete. So I'm going to delete that chart. Another way to show two data series, and I'm going to go back to this data and press F11, create another chart. I'm going to select the difference series and delete that by pressing delete, is to build a column chart on top of another column chart. And we'll have what's been referred to as a thermometer chart. So the first thing we're going to do is select one of the series. In this case, I'm just going to select the target series. Right click it, format the data series, and left click the secondary axis radio button, and then close that dialog box. The next thing we want to do is delete the axis labels for the secondary axis because they're exactly the same as the axis on the other side of the chart. So I'm going to select that and delete that by pressing the delete key. So the next thing we need to do is we can select one or the other series. There's a couple ways to go about doing this, but I'm going to select the target since it's red, right click it, and in the shortcut menu, left click format data series. And I'm going to increase the gap, which is the distance between one column and another, which in effect will make the column more narrow. I'll make it 350%. We'll try that. And I'm going to close this dialog box. And we end up with what's called a thermometer chart. It's sort of similar to what the United Way does in terms of visually displaying their goal against the funds that they've collected thus far. So I'm going to delete that chart. So comparative histogram. We're going to build a comparative histogram. And what the heck is that? Well, a histogram is a chart that shows the frequency of occurrence for different categories. And a comparative histogram shows one histogram against another. I've pulled off the internet the leading causes of death worldwide, and I have the frequency split between males and females. And I'm only going to use the top 15, and I've put the rest of them in here just for informational purposes in case you ever wondered. And in order for this to work, I need for one of the series to be negative and one of the series to be positive. I've chosen to make the male series negative by just taking the number and multiplying it by a -1. And to create the chart, or to begin the steps to create the chart, I'm going to select the labels, hold the control key down, select the female series, and then select the male series, and then go to Insert, Bar Chart, and double-click Clustered Bar. Now, when we create a chart like this, Excel by default creates an embedded chart. I didn't want to use F11 to create a chart, which would create it on a chart sheet, because the default chart type is a column chart, and I needed a bar chart. So we're going to move this chart to its own chart sheet, and I'll select the default name, which now is Chart 8. And we need to do some work here. So the first thing I'm going to do is to format the vertical axis by double-clicking the vertical axis. And I want to move the labels to the low point, which moves them all to the left side of the chart. I'm going to close that. The next thing I want to do is format the horizontal axis by double-clicking the axis so I can get the Format Axis dialog box. Go to the Number Formatting dialog box, and then select Custom Format. And what we want to do is get rid of the negative numbers. And as you may know, there's 4 different quadrants when you're setting up a custom format. The first quadrant has to do with the formatting for positive numbers, and these quadrants are separated by a semicolon. The second quadrant is for negative numbers, and the third quadrant, if there's only 3, is for formatting zeros. So I'm going to add that to the custom list and then close. So I've gotten rid of the negative numbers on the left side of the chart. Because for the male series, they're really not negative numbers. I just converted them to negative numbers so they will display on the left side of the axis. The next thing we want to do is select the vertical axis, and I can double click that and get the Format Axis dialog box. I'm going to get rid of the tick marks. I'm going to close that. And then I'm going to select one of the data series and double click it to launch the Format Data Series dialog box. And I'm going to set the series overlap to 100%. That's going to align the one series with the other. And then I'm going to set the gap width to 0%, which is going to widen the bar and get rid of all the white space in between the bars. Now I can close that and left click off of that to deselect that series. And we've created a comparative histogram where we are comparing the relative causes of death for males and females. And one thing that jumps out pretty significantly is unintentional injuries is a lot larger cause of death for males than it is females. I guess we're pretty clumsy. I don't mean to make light of the fact that this is representative of people that actually have died. So that's dual axis charts. We first created a dual axis chart by selecting a series and in the Format Series dialog box, left-clicking the radio button to move that series to a secondary axis. We also created a combination chart by selecting the series and changing the chart type, which is associated with the given series and not the chart. And then we looked at a couple ways to plot performance against a target, either a fixed target, where we plotted the difference between the performance and the target, and then we created what is termed as a thermometer chart, and then we also created a performance against target visual display that showed an acceptable range of values and the actual values plotted against that. And finally, we created a comparative histogram, which pooled together several different charting techniques and hopefully displayed how robust the charting features in Excel are.